from the very ordinary spectacle of Mr. Carrados's mildly benevolent face, while the sterilised ghost of his now forgotten amusement still lingered about his features. "Good heavens!" he managed to articulate. "How do you know?" "Isn't that what you wanted of me?" asked Carrados suavely. "Don't humbug Max," said Carlyle severely. "This is no joke." An undefined mistrust of his own powers suddenly possessed him in the presence of this mystery. "How do you come to know of Nina Brun and Lord Seastoke?" "You're a detective, Louis," replied Carrados. "How does one know these things? By using one's eyes and putting two and two together." Carlyle groaned and flung out an arm petulantly. "Is it all bunkum, Max? Do you really see all the time? Though that doesn't go very far towards explaining it." "Like Vidal, I see very well at close quarters," replied Carrados, lightly running a finger along the inscription on the tetradrachm. "For longer range I keep another pair of eyes. Would you like to test them?" Mr. Carlyle's assent was not very gracious. It was, in fact, faintly sulky. He was suffering the annoyance of feeling distinctly unimpressive in his own department. But he was also curious. "The bell is just behind you, if you don't mind," said his host. "Parkinson will appear. You might take a note of him while he's in." The man who had admitted Mr. Carlyle proved to be Parkinson. "This gentleman is Mr. Carlyle, Parkinson," explained Carrados the moment the man entered. "You will remember him for the future?" Parkinson's apologetic eye swept the visitor from head to foot, but so lightly and swiftly that it conveyed to that gentleman the comparison of being very deftly dusted. "I will endeavour to do so, sir," replied Parkinson, turning again to his master. "I shall be at home to Mr. Carlyle whenever he calls. That's all." "Very well, sir." "Now, Louis," remarked Mr. Carrados briskly when the door had closed again, "you have had a good opportunity of studying Parkinson. What's he like?" "In what way?" "I mean as a matter of description. I'm a blind man. I haven't seen my servant for 12 years. What idea can you give me of him? I asked you to notice." "I know you did, but your Parkinson is the sort of man who has very little about him to describe. He's the embodiment of the ordinary. His height is about average." "5 feet 9," murmured Carrados. "Slightly above the mean." "Scarcely noticeably so. Clean shaven, medium brown hair, no particularly marked features, dark eyes, good teeth." "False," interposed Carrados. "The teeth, not the statement." "Possibly," admitted Mr. Carlyle. "I'm not a dental expert and I had no opportunity of examining Mr. Parkinson's mouth in detail. But what is the drift of all this?" "His clothes?" "Oh, just the ordinary evening dress of a valet. There's not much room for variety in that." "You noticed, in fact, nothing special by which Parkinson could be identified?" "Well, he wore an unusually broad gold ring on the little finger of the left hand." "But that is removable. And yet Parkinson has an ineradicable mole. The small one, I admit, on his chin. And you a human sleuth hound. Oh, Louis!" "At all events," retorted Carlyle, writhing a little under this good humoured satire, although it was easy enough to see in it Carrados's affectionate intention, "at all events I dare say I can give as good a description of Parkinson as he can of me." "That is what we are going to test. Ring the bell again." "Seriously?" "Quite. I am trying my eyes against yours. If I can't give you 50 out of 100 I'll renounce my private detectorial ambition for ever." "It isn't quite the same," objected Carlyle, but he rang the bell. "Come in and close the door, Parkinson," said Carrados when the man appeared. "Don't look at Mr. Carlyle again. In fact, you had better stand with your back towards him. He won't mind. Now describe to me his appearance as you observed it." Parkinson tendered his respectful apologies to Mr. Carlyle for the liberty he was compelled to take, by the deferential quality of his voice. "Mr. Carlyle, sir, wears patent leather boots of about size 7 and very little used. There are 5 buttons, but on the left boot one button, the third up, is missing, leaving loose threads and not the more usual metal fastener. Mr. Carlyle's trousers, sir, are of a dark material, a dark grey line of about 1/4 inch width on a darker ground.
The bottoms are turned permanently up, and are just now a little muddy, if I may say so."
"Very muddy," interposed Mr. Carlyle generously. "It is a wet night, Parkinson."
"Yes, sir. Very unpleasant weather. If you will allow me, sir, I will brush you in the hall. The mud is dry now, I notice. Then, sir," continued Parkinson, reverting to the business in hand, "there are the dark green cashmere hose. A curb pattern key chain passes into the left-hand trouser pocket." From the visitor's nether garments the photographic eyed Parkinson proceeded to higher ground, and with increasing wonder Mr. Carlyle listened to the faithful catalogue of his possessions. His fetter and link albert of gold and platinum was minutely described. His spotted blue ascot with its gentlemanly pearl scarf pin was set forth, and the fact that the buttonhole in the left lapel of his morning coat showed signs of use was duly noted. What Parkinson saw he recorded, but he made no deductions. A handkerchief carried in the cuff of the right sleeve was simply that to him, and not an indication that Mr. Carlyle was, indeed, left-handed. But a more delicate part of Parkinson's undertaking remained. He approached it with a double cough. "As regards Mr. Carlyle's personal appearance, sir."
"No, enough," cried the gentleman concerned hastily. "I am more than satisfied. You are a keen observer, Parkinson."
"I have trained myself to suit my master's requirements, sir,"
replied the man. He looked towards Mr. Carrados, received a nod, and withdrew. Mr. Carlyle was the first to speak. "That man of yours would be worth £5 a week to me, Max," he remarked thoughtfully. "But of course " "I don't think that he would take it," replied Carrados in a voice of equally detached speculation. "He suits me very well. But you have the chance of using his services indirectly." "You still mean that seriously?" "I notice in you a chronic disinclination to take me seriously, Louis. It really is, to an Englishman, almost painful. Is there something inherently comic about me, or the atmosphere of The Turrets?" "No, my friend," replied Mr. Carlyle. "But there is something essentially prosperous. That's what points to the improbable. Now, what is it?" "It might be merely a whim, but it's more than that," replied Carrados. "It's well, partly vanity, partly ennui, partly" certainly there was something more nearly tragic in his voice than comic now "partly hope." Mr. Carlyle was too tactful to pursue the subject. "Those are three tolerable motives," he acquiesced. "I'll do anything you want, Max, on one condition." "Agreed. And it is?" "That you tell me how you knew so much of this affair." He tapped the silver coin which lay on the table near them. "I'm not easily flabbergasted," he added. "You won't believe that there's nothing to explain, that it was purely second sight?" "No," replied Carlyle tersely, "I won't." "You're quite right. And yet the thing is very simple." "They always are when you know," soliloquised the other. "That's what makes them so confoundedly difficult when you don't." "Here is this one, then. In Padua, which seems to be regaining its old reputation as the birthplace of spurious antiques, by the way, there lives an ingenious craftsman named Pietro Stelli. This simple soul, who possesses a talent not inferior to that of Cavino at his best, has for many years turned his hand to the not unprofitable occupation of forging rare Greek and Roman coins. As a collector and student of certain Greek colonials, and a specialist in forgeries, I have been familiar with Stelli's workmanship for years. Latterly he seems to have come under the influence of an international crook called, at the moment, Dompierre, who soon saw a way of utilizing Stelli's genius on a royal scale. Hélène Brunesi, who in private life and really is, I believe, Madame Dompierre, readily lent her services to the enterprise." "Quite so," nodded Mr. Carlyle, as his host paused. "You see the whole sequence, of course?" "Not exactly. Not in detail," confessed Mr. Carlyle. "Dompierre's idea was to gain access to some of the most celebrated cabinets of Europe and substitute Stelli's fabrications for the genuine coins. The princely collection of rarities that he would thus amass might be difficult to